Hi guys, welcome back. Today I'm filming what I'm hoping will be the first video in a new series on my channel. As many of you guys might know watching my videos, is that I am a massive Agatha Christie fan, and I've been meaning to do some videos that address topics that are somehow related to Agatha Christie or to her works, or to the mysteries and the genre that she writes in. And the first video in this series will be Hercule Poirot recommends me mystery novels. This idea originated from me reading The Clocks by Agatha Christie not too long ago. And in this book we have Hercule Poirot, who is somewhat older in age, and he is stagnating. He is not getting any cases that interest him, and so he turns, as many of us do, to fiction and starts reading mystery novels to kind of keep his grey cells working. And so in this book he actually discusses with our narrator person and makes book recommendations of mystery novels. So I've decided to read the 3 mystery novels that he recommends in this book, and I will tell you a bit about how it was, what I learned from it, if I would recommend to other people to read these books. So all these books were written at the end of the 19th century and the very beginning of the 20th century. And I'm going to start with the oldest one, and it's called The Leavenworth Case and was written by Anne-Catherine Green in 1878. And what really was striking to me just about the author in general is that, I don't know if you guys have heard of her, I had never heard of her previously, and it's such a shame because she's considered to be the mother of American crime fiction, and she started writing super early and way earlier, for example, than Arthur Conan Doyle. And it's really a shame that she seems to be very less remembered today. About this book, Hercule Poirot says, "It is admirable. One savors its period atmosphere, its studied and deliberate melodrama." And I couldn't agree with him more. The Leavenworth Case is about a young lawyer. He's called Everett Raymond, and he has to take his employer's place, who is the head lawyer of the firm, to accompany a trial. And the trial involves the death of a wealthy merchant called Horatio Leavenworth, and he was shot in the head in his study with all the doors closed. And so we follow Mr. Raymond as he gets acquainted with the case and also works together with a detective of the New York police called Ebenezer Gryce, who apparently is a recurring character in Green's work. 2 central figures in this book are also the 2 adoptive daughters of Leavenworth, Mary and Eleanor, and they're very different people, and it, at least in the beginning, really looks like one of them might have committed the murder. What really was striking to me reading this book is that I think it really cemented a lot of the typical mystery tropes. You have obviously the locked room. You have things like how inheritance plays a role in discovering who might have benefited from a murder. Green is also apparently really good at showing very specific medical and ballistic evidence, which I thought was really interesting. And there are obviously red herrings and also psychological clues. So I was really impressed by the plurality of all the clues that the author provides to us. On the other hand, this book felt so incredibly of its time. It was written at the end of the Victorian period, and you can really see that, even though it's set in the USA. There's, as Hercule Poirot states, some romantic elements, which at least in Agatha Christie's books you can see that she is also implementing romantic elements to her mysteries, or the relationship of people is important to her cases. But there was also a lot of this typical Victorian sensationalism, and that's something that you might or might not enjoy. I thought it was really fun to read about and to try and understand how people were in that time. One really striking thing was that one of the adoptive daughters of Horatio Leavenworth, Eleanor, when she is accused of maybe having something to do with his murder, goes to her uncle's body and kisses his dead lips. and then proceeds to tell everyone that it's impossible for her to have murdered her uncle, because how could she then mourn him in that way and kiss his dead lips? And I don't think this would be particularly shocking in the Victorian era, also in terms of how people dealt with their dead relatives. So it just told a lot about the era that this book is set in and was written in. One theme that is also explored a lot in this book and really relates directly to ways people were thinking in the Victorian era was the concept of shame, and how shameful things have to be kept within the family and cannot be divulged because it could threaten the family name and the family honor, and that was such a big institution in that time. And that's something that maybe as you're reading it might sound completely foreign to you and not really understandable. There's clearly this obsession that you can really see through the two adoptive daughters and how they react to the trial and what they're willing to give as information to the police. There's this obsession of respectability and hiding secrets. One really interesting thing I thought also was to put two prime suspects for a case as being women, because I think in that period you really had this image of the perfect woman, the angel in the house, who would be very meek and obedient. And I think this would really shock people to have two women being potentially murderers, because that would just clash so much with this representation of women in that time. So overall, reading this book from a historical lens and from trying to understand the time it was set in was super interesting. The writing obviously feels a bit dated. There are some passages that dragged a bit, especially passages that were describing things like duty and so on, which are maybe things that feel so foreign to us as modern readers that it might be a bit annoying. On the other hand, I thought the reading experience itself, in terms of the plot and all the red herrings, was really engaging, and I was not able to find out who the murderer was on my own, and I still think all the clues were there for us to see. So yeah, for me it was a really interesting reading experience, and if these things sound interesting to you, you might want to give it a go, especially in terms of maybe understanding the beginnings of the mystery genre. Yeah. The next book that Hercule Poirot recommended in the Clocks was Arsène Lupin, Gentleman Thief. Arsène Lupin, Gentleman Cambrioleur in its original, by Maurice Leblanc. And this book was published in 1907 and is a collection of 9 short stories that somehow build a kind of patchwork of the main protagonist's life. Arsène Lupin is a thief, as the title says, but the really interesting thing is the duality in his character, because at the same time he sometimes decides to help the police out in specific murder cases. What Hercule Poirot says about the Arsène Lupin books, because there are several books in the series and I actually plan to read more of them, is how fantastic, how unreal, and yet what vitality there is in them, what vigor, what life. They are preposterous, but they have panache. There is humor too. And I must say again, I really agree with my dear Hercule, because I really did think these stories were really good fun. The first story especially was, I think, a great start into a series following a single character as interesting as Arsène Lupin is, because it is set on a transatlantic ship voyage, and our main protagonist hears from the captain that he knows that the notorious thief Arsène Lupin is said to be on board. They gotten information from the police, and they're essentially using the whole voyage to unmask the thief. And things get even more tense when there's actually stealings going on the ship, so you can really see that someone here is stealing stuff, and it might be this very mysterious figure of Arsène Lupin. I would say the stories themselves, the 9 different stories, are very readable. You can read them really fast, and they're fast-paced as well. What really interested me most was the character Arsène Lupin himself, because he's kind of a Robin Hood figure, because you never know on which side of the law he is, and in some ways he's on nobody's side. He is on his side, but sometimes he's also on the side of people who are in need. He is kind of a thief with a heart of gold, and he has a very clear set of morals about who he wants to steal from and why. And I thought it was interesting how this was explored at the same time as class relationships in the beginning of the 20th century in France. There's many things in terms of tropes and things happening that remind me of Agatha Christie's thrillerish type books. For example, like The Man in the Brown Suit. There's like extraordinary disappearances, smoke screens, disguises, and disguises is a trope that Agatha Christie uses a lot in her books. And yeah, just I think Arsène Lupin's personality really shines through, because he is at the same time obviously a very skilled observer and therefore is good at doing detective work, but there's always this swinging between the Sherlock Holmes type and the Moriarty type, which I thought was really interesting. So yeah, overall a very readable collection of short stories. It's really fun, you can get through it very quickly, and it's these really short, fun, bite-sized adventures. The last book I read on recommendation of my dear Hercule Poirot is Le mystère de la chambre jaune, The Mystery of the Yellow Room by Gaston Leroux, which was published also in 1907. I have previously read The Phantom of the Opera by Gaston Leroux and quite enjoyed it, found it very melodramatic, but it's a very fun and spooky and atmospheric read. And so I was really looking forward to see what the author does in the very more classical mystery genre. This is what Hercule Poirot says about the book. That is really a classic. I approve of it from start to finish. Such a logical approach. And later he says, definitely a masterpiece, and I gather almost forgotten nowadays. And that is so sad to hear him say that in a Christie novel from the 60s, because I also feel like this book is not been talked about much. The Phantom of the Opera is something people know, I guess mostly because of the musical, but this was my favorite of these three books that I read for this project, and I would really recommend it, and I think you should really give it a try if you're interested in the mystery genre in general. The book itself is set on an isolated estate in France. We follow a professor, a scientist, Professor Stangerson, and his daughter Mathilde, and they both conduct their scientific experiments in an isolated pavilion on the grounds of the estate. The mystery starts when the daughter, Mathilde, is found battered and unconscious in the Yellow Room, which is a room adjacent to the laboratory, and the room is closed from the inside, so we have yet another locked room mystery. Our main character and our main detective character is called Joseph Rouletabille, and he is a journalist by trade, but he somehow seems to enjoy taunting the police with his own abilities in detection, which really reminded me of Hercule Poirot and of Sherlock Holmes as well. Next to him, working on the case, is also Frédéric Larsan, who is a police detective from the Sûreté, and they have this ongoing friendly rivalry in discussing the case and trying to solve it faster than the other. As I said, this is a locked room puzzle mystery, and I think it's really a typical one of its genre and a really good one. This book from the three that I'm discussing in this video is probably the one that felt like inspired Agatha Christie the most in her own writing. Hercule Poirot and Joseph Rouletabille really have some very similar aspects in terms of personality and knowledge of detection. Rouletabille is also someone who wants to keep his audience waiting a bit and doesn't always share all his findings and all his thoughts, at least not right away. Some key elements and clues in this mystery really reminded me of some clues that Agatha Christie uses herself in her books. There's the importance of the help in a bigger household, family secrets, and a very twisty ending that felt really reminiscent of some of the classical tropes that she uses in her books. Like in The Phantom of the Opera by the same author, the format of the novel is somehow unusual because the narrator is a witness of the story and he's following Joseph Rouletabille along on his adventures. So it has this style of reporting something that has happened in the past, but there's also some snippets of transcripts of trials and some diary entries, and I thought that it was used really well in the mystery genre, and it was used in this book way better than in The Phantom of the Opera. Other things that I really appreciated were obviously that at the beginning of the 20th century someone is writing about a woman scientist. I always appreciate that. There were a few passages that were somehow dragging, but overall the pacing was really good, the story engaging, kept me guessing until the very end, and ultimately I do think it's really a classic of the mystery genre, and you should really read it if you enjoy mysteries. Alright guys, these were my thoughts on the 3 books that I read on recommendations of Hercule Poirot. I hope you enjoyed this video, I hope you enjoyed the format. Let me know down below if I made you want to pick up any of these books, because I do think that it's sometimes really interesting to go back in time when talking about a certain literature genre and trying to pick out some pieces and understand how it became what it is today. And in my case, I also obviously wanted to see how it might have influenced Agatha Christie herself and her writing. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed the ride. In the meantime, I hope you're reading great books, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye!